Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sarah. I don't know if you can hear me properly on the back. Yes, it's okay. Okay, thanks. As I said, as Sarah said, I'm Dr. Silvia Bel Serrat. I'm the manager of the National Nutrition Surveillance Center, and I will present you with great pleasure the main findings of the fourth COSI report that has been published today in collaboration with the Minister for Health Promotion. So let's get started with some background information. The estimates of the Global Burden of Disease Study 2013 showed that 1 in 4 children aged 5 to 14 years old in Europe is overweight and or obese. Focusing on the Republic of Ireland, the COSI report that was published in 2014 showed that the prevalence of childhood overweight and obesity was still quite high. However, there seemed to be a potential stabilization in the rates of overweight and obesity in children aged 7 years and 9 years. In 2006, the WHO Regional Office for Europe, together with 13 member states, including Ireland, initiated the Childhood Obesity Surveillance Initiative, or COSI. COSI was conceived as a harmonized European surveillance system to monitor the prevalence of overweight and obesity in children in this region. Then, in January 2008, the WHO issued the recommendations and guidelines for the regular collection of anthropometric data in children worldwide. It was in 2007 and 2008 when the first COSI data collection run took place. Therefore, the aims of COSI at the European level, but also or specifically here in the Republic of Ireland, are to measure weight, height, waist circumference, and body mass index in Irish primary school children, to estimate the prevalence of underweights, normal weights, overweights, and obesity, and then to measure the trends in overweight and obesity rates over the COSI rounds. Very briefly, I will give you some details about the methodological aspects of COSI here in the Republic of Ireland. So far, a total of 4 rounds have been completed. The first round took place in 2008. The second was in 2010. Examinations in round 3 were carried out mainly in 2012, and children in round 4 were examined in 2015. In order to do this, nutritionists were recruited and properly trained, and then they went to the schools and measured weight, height, and waist circumference following the standardized WHO COSI protocol on data collection procedures. Data from more than 70,000 children are available so far after the 4 COSI rounds. A total of 163 schools consented to participate in round 1, and then, because we followed a sentinel approach, these same 163 schools were contacted again in rounds 2, 3, and 4. Children in first class in these schools were measured over the 4 COSI rounds, and in addition, in rounds 2, 3, and 4, we measured other classes beyond first class children. Therefore, as I will present now on the results section, and as you will see in the report, the results section is split into first class children and into children that are 8 years old or older. So now I move on to the results section. Here in this table, I'm showing the participation rates by round and class. Highlighted in orange, I think you can see well. Highlighted in orange, you can see the participation rates among first-class children. You can see the highest participation rate was achieved in round 1, but still the majority of the children participated in the subsequent COSI rounds. Also, we have observed an incline in the percentage of parents who refused to participate in the study. With this, we refer to those parents that didn't give written consent to their children to participate. Then, focusing on children older or beyond first class, we see that the participation rates and also the percentage of parents who didn't give consent to their children to participate in the study remain pretty similar across the COSI rounds. At this stage, I should say that I will be presenting the results on the prevalence of overweight and obesity, but you will find more detailed results in the report that I see that most of you have already. So here in this figure, we can see the prevalence of overweight and obesity, which was defined according to the cutoffs of the International Obesity Task Force, split by round and among first-class children. The blue line refers to all the sample, to all the children. The red line is only for boys, and the girls, and the green one is for girls. So we observed a significant decline in the prevalence of overweight and obesity since the first survey in 2008. Then as well, we can see that there is a stabilization in the rates of overweight and obesity since the last survey in 2012. And we can see as well very clearly from this figure that girls were more overweight and obese than boys. This graph shows again the prevalence of overweight and obesity by round, but in that case, the children have been split into those that attend day schools and those that attend other schools. So day schools are the red line, and non-day schools are the blue line. We can see again that the prevalence of overweight and obesity, we can see very clearly that was higher among day schools or disadvantaged schools. And we observe a significant inverse trend towards the stabilization of overweight and obesity rates among non-day schools. However, no trend was observed among day schools. Now, focusing on the results on older children, we see that there is a stabilization or a potential stabilization in the rates of overweight and obesity as children become older. And as we have observed for first-class children, we see that girls again are more overweight and obese than boys. When we stratify the sample in children attending day schools and those attending other schools, we see that, as we have observed before, that the prevalence of overweight and obesity was higher among day schools. And also this gap that is present between both types of schools seems to be widening as children become older. So the three key messages that could summarize what I have just told you are that the prevalence of overweight and obesity in Irish children seems to be stabilizing, that girls were more overweight and obese than boys, and that the prevalence of overweight and obesity among children attending day schools was higher than for those children in non-disadvantaged schools. And last but not least, I would like to thank all the children, the parents, and the schools who take part in the study. Also to all the people who have been involved in the development of this report at any stage. And of course, thanks to you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Silvia. I'd like to invite Professor Cecily Kelleher, Dr John Devlin, and Dr Mirjam Heinen to join. I think we might need to come up around the speaker here because we don't have a roving mic. That was a really interesting presentation, Silvia, and thank you very much for distilling the key points and the evidence from the report. I suppose before I open to the floor for any questions in relation to the findings and the research, I might ask John if he has some observation or comments he might like to make in relation to the findings.
Thank you for asking me that, and I didn't hear a minister today, so I hope what I'm saying is somewhat consistent, but it's interesting just looking at those trends. I'm sure some of my predecessors in the department would love to take credit now for actually the reduction or the stabilisation of the rates, so I always ask myself as to why. The fact it always prompts further questions as to why, or what's behind all this, and what accounts for stabilisation in rates and so on. But I mean, I think it's very clear from this that a picture is emerging, one which, like, we in the policy side need to take obviously heed of, and our recently published obesity policy very much was built on previous rounds of COSI and other kind of surveys like HBSC. The next trends report was going to be launched in hopefully later this month, and also adult survey data. So without this kind of information, like, we would be utterly lost. So I just want again to acknowledge, the authors, the workers, and the fact it's got the backing of WHO behind it. I mean, for me, it just seemed, like this picture, which is yes, trends, the socioeconomic, the gender differences, and so on. I mean, that's something that we need to take account of, and we did try to take account of that in the obesity policy. Some of which you may be familiar with, but I mean, there were two key themes underpinning that. One was the socioeconomic part of it, and the second thing was children. And most of the measures, of which I'm sure you're familiar with all 60 of them and so on, but have that overlay of inequalities, and particularly with children. So whether it's the actions that we are trying to take at a department-wide, which is very much working across different sectors. So when you read about the fiscal measures and sugar taxes and so on, it's very much with children in mind, and also the socioeconomic differences, based on information like this, or like, I mean, the actions, for example, that the community need to take, and I'll be chairing a session later on in terms of parental intervention, so on and so forth. They need to be focused with this kind of information in mind to look at deprivation and so on. So we very much welcome this. I mean, we would hope to think that the actions we're taking and everything else are reflective of what the trend is. And I mean, it isn't, and it's interesting because it prompts a lot of questions for me, because when we were doing our policy, I mean, we relied on information, but we also relied heavily on consultation, and particularly consultation with children. And the answers that we got from that process, and was facilitated with the Department of Children, really struck me as being quite different from maybe my preconceptions of what children think in relation to kind of what determines obesity, the stigma associated with it, and so on. And therefore, in turn, if we don't understand that kind of knowledge, information, well then, our attempts to do something about it are going to be lost. So that's just a quick 1 minute overview. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Some very interesting observations there. Just in terms of the reporters and the audience, is there any burning questions or that? Grace?
Well done on all the great work. I'm just wondering, the round for parents that refused, do we know if they're the same parents that refused the previous years, or is it just the percentage?
No, it's anonymised. So essentially, there's 3 levels of consent to this. The school must consent to participate. So we were very appreciative of these schools, which have been the same Sentinel schools from the beginning. Then a communication goes out that that there will be the survey undertaken, and the parents have to send in an informed written consent. So it's essentially what it means is there has to be active engagement. We don't know, because we haven't gone back to do any qualitative work recently, what the main reasons are, but we can infer some of the issues around sensitivity, around measurement. And then the third level is the assent. So on the day, the child has every opportunity to refuse to take part if he or she wants to do so. We did do a fair amount of consultative work at the beginning of setting up this survey, including qualitative work with parents and family members, and a key part of what emerged out of that was the whole privacy and notion of how the survey was conducted.
Sorry, Mary, there's...
Sorry, can I ask a question? And again, it's just on that non-response rate. It's almost 40% that aren't given consent in the latter 2 runs of COSI. By the way, congratulations on the study. It's a great study, and it's very useful for all of us. But I'm just wondering what the implications of that for the interpretation of the results. Given the fact that if we've about 40% of children not being measured, if that's because of what we know of parent perception and that in relation to stigma, in relation to weight, then what implications has that for the prevalence rate? And the other thing I would like to ask is whether you consider opt-out consent, because they had this problem in Australia, and when they brought in opt-out consent, the rates of participation jumped to over 90%.
So I would agree that may well be part of the explanation here. The non-response rate was highest in the youngest cohort of children, which are the 7-year-olds. It actually is higher in the older children, the participation rates. So it's always an issue with any kind of survey when you get a 60-40 response. Who are the 40%? Are they people who simply didn't want to have their child measured, or did they ever get the form to sign it or return it? I think in all of the discussions we've had, and particularly in the ethical review, it has been very clear that opt-out was not an option from the reviewers of this study for us and at the COSI level at the WHO. So it may just be random non-response, it may be systematic non-response. What I think is clear in the data, however, is that from the first there's been a downward rate, even allowing for that response rate. So within the responders, the rate has been significantly going down. So that's why I think it's reasonable to say that it's a real trend as opposed to a response issue, but that always is an issue for any survey.
Thank you.
Just one further comment. First of all, congratulations on a great study. I think the findings are valid and they're consistent with other data and within data from this country and international findings. But in relation to the issue about consent, there was one, and I'm sure you've looked at this, was there much variation in the response rates across the schools, and was there any evidence that the schools really had higher response
Yes.
rates, that the rates of obesity were higher?
And thank you, Ivan. And we did look into that, and Mirjam may want to answer, because we did look to see was there a difference in prevalence in schools depending on the response rate. And you might want to.
What I can remember, because like that was a while ago that I did those, because it was already
There
for
wasn't.
the previous. Yeah, but no, but a while ago that I did those, but there wasn't indeed, you know, like we didn't show anything. There was differences, not at all, you know, like, and that's
reassuring.
yeah. So we did look into those things because like we were wondering whether that was the case, but that wasn't, you know, yeah.
Hannah?
Could I ask a question just about the children as in a group and overweight
Yeah.
and obese? Is there any changes in the BMI across those in terms of the proportion of those that are obese and the proportion that are overweight in the overweight and obese group?
No,
No, so
it's pretty much staying pretty stable as to what it is.
We showed that in a previous report. We looked at it because we have some longitudinal data, and we looked at whether, you know, what did the children do over time. You know, like that was 2 time points, and we didn't show, like, there wasn't really a lot of changes. They didn't became worse, but they didn't become better either. So.
okay, and no changes in the median?
We didn't look at the BMI yet. That's
No,
something,
no,
something else we need to do.
Yeah. And indeed there is a subgroup for whom we do have longitudinal data, going back to Grace's earlier point, where we did have consent to link them across the surveys. And that's showing pretty much the same findings as the repeated cross-sectional data. And I do think it is worth highlighting, and again, as John pointed out, we do have this inequity issue that we really need to address, because although the Department of Education designated schools are a small subgroup of this, because that's the nature of how this sample was selected, but it is a pretty persistent disparity which has been there across each of the waves of the study, and it remains a key challenge, especially for the girls, and is something that we really need some focused intervention in the school settings that have been backed up by other familial interventions, which we've been hearing about in different presentations also.
Thanks very much, Cecily. And I suppose if you're looking for your priority research focus for the next little while, Cecily has just given it to you. So thanks very much, Cecily and Mirjam and Sylvia and John. Really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for your attention and your questions. I'm sure if you want to speak to the ladies afterwards, they'll be more than happy to chat with you. And I'm sure it's Grace will hand over to or Marisha to move on to the next session. Thanks very much.